Wonderful. Thank you for joining us tonight. I thank you for your attendance. We are looking forward to this discussion, the part one of 3 in our mini-series on the making of Ann Lowe, American Couturier, presented by Wintherthur Museum with garments loaned from the museum at FIT and recreation support from the University of Delaware. Let me introduce our 2 panelists tonight. We have Katya Roesle, an instructor at the University of Delaware in fashion design. Katya has worked in the fashion and apparel industry as a creative and technical designer for women's wear, menswear, children's wear, uniforms, and wearable medical devices. She teaches CAD, illustration, and product development at the University of Delaware. Her scholarship integrates design, pedagogy, and technology, as she recently co-authored the Book of Pockets, a practical guide for fashion designers. And she is joined by Alex Cully. He is a fashion design and product innovation major at the University of Delaware, and he is one of the 3 students invited to assist Professor Roesle in this assignment that we'll be discussing today.
A few years ago, the Winterthur staff contacted me because they were interested in developing a lab coat for their curators and for their textile lab. So I designed a lab coat for them, and I involved some students. And then a few years later, I've done little workshops, and I've done technology workshops for their students there. And then this opportunity came, and they said, would you be interested in doing it? And I said, let me see if I can find someone who would be interested in it. And then they came back and they said, no, you're the one who will be doing this. So at first I wasn't sure it was for me. And then it just so happened that I just ended up doing it after all. And I never thought that I would be looking at a dress like this. It wasn't something I was naturally interested in, but it provided such a challenge, and it was such a rich experience, and to be able to involve students was so meaningful, and have them be part of this story and understand what it was to maybe walk in her shoes was really meaningful.
Had you worked with recreations previously?
That's a funny question, because recreating garments is a lot of what the fashion industry is, right? So when I was working in the fashion industry, we were constantly copying garments. And so I was used to grabbing a garment, counting how many pieces were there, looking for the grain line, evaluating the seam finishes, evaluating the hem finishes, and sort of making a little recipe of the garment. And every single one of those skills that I had used was the same thing I used in order to copy this dress for Ann Lowe.
Prior to this project, had you spent any time in archives?
Well, when I went to Drexel, I had done some sort of assistance in the archives here and there, but not really. This was a new world. I was used to new garments as a fashion designer. I wasn't used to handling. I wasn't used to documenting every step of the process, which is what I was asked to do. So from copying the garment to creating the pattern to testing it, every single moment was documented, and that was something I wasn't used to.
Tedious.
It was very tedious. I was like, I've got to set up my camera again.
Sure.
I have to don't forget to take this picture. And now I look back and I'm like, oh, I forgot to do this little part, so. Right, I wanted it to be valuable to people 50, 100 years from now, but I'm not exactly sure, what that could be. I had never heard of Ann Lowe before, unfortunately. I was really, I feel like I had a great education. I feel I have my finger on the pulse of the fashion industry, and I understand history, but it was not taught to me, and it was not, she was not taught, and this story was not taught to me. So this was eye-opening, and the other designers that are involved in this story, and where she falls in line with other African American designers has been eye-opening for me.
So Ann Lowe is a fashion designer, an African-American one that didn't get a lot of recognition in the past, and she is the designer for the Jackie Kennedy dress. And what we really wanted to do is really give her the recognition that she deserved from the past.
There's some sort of story about, Jacqueline Kennedy was trying to she was getting her sea legs when it came to her style. As with many wedding dresses, there are more than one cook in the kitchen, so it had, her mother was involved, there was her father-in-law was involved, they say. And so it's hard to know, exactly what she wanted, but she did say, that she requested a tremendous Ann Lowe dress. And that's sort of the thing that's, always in my head when I think about Ann Lowe.
Ann Lowe was tasked to do a lot for the Kennedy wedding. She did the whole bridal ensemble, the bridesmaids, maid of honor, and of course the wedding dress.
Seeing the dress for the first time was like seeing the Mona Lisa. It was laid out on the table. It's huge. It still had so many layers, and it still had the shape of Jacqueline Kennedy in it. It gave me goosebumps the first time I saw it. It's very quiet at the archives. And there aren't a lot of people that were working there when we went to go visit, so it's very, very still. And it was almost a little bit of an emotional experience, because you think about the story of the Kennedys and the mythology of of their family, and then you think about Ann Lowe and everything that she went through in order to make that dress and her story, and it just kind of hits you all at once. And I was like, oh, this is important. This is really important what I'm experiencing here, and not many people get to see this dress. So that hit me very quickly.
So the dress is an ivory silk taffeta dress. It's a bodice without a waistline seam. It has 7 rosettes around the whole dress, and in the rosettes there are faux flowers, and around the bottom of the dress there are about 10 tiers of swags, for these ruffles that go around the dress, and also the bodice is pleated.
The whole process has been, I've been very nervous about doing the right thing. In terms of the technicality of measuring the dress and getting every last measurement, every last detail, I was really concerned. So it was thousands of pictures between Kate and myself that were taken, and sometimes triple doubling down on all these photographs and double checking my measurements. And 3 days was a lot of time to get this done. It was a good amount of time to do the evaluation and look at the dress, but luckily they said if I ever had to come back I could, so that was always in my back pocket had I all of a sudden looked at my notes and been like, oh shucks, I didn't get that. There were 1 or 2 measurements I was just like, oh, I didn't really get that one, but I'm gonna have to reason some things out in order to figure it out and do it right. Well, a lot of our courses don't have this in-depth opportunity to look at surface design, to really go deep into a project. They'll make a jacket or they'll make a few garments for their senior collection, but to really, investigate who a designer is and really get to intimately know who this designer is something that you can only really do in a project like this.
So what we did was we worked with Professor Roesle for the process, and we got together and we hand sewn down the swags. We did it in chunks. It was 20 hours, right? Mm-hmm. About for 2. Yeah, for 2 it was 20 hours. And then after that, we decided to do the rosettes. So we had to gather it, and then we had to spiral it, and then tack it down all the way around as well, and then sew them onto the dress.
We were also tasked with looking at least 15 designer techniques, 5 of which were supposed to be Ann Lowe signatures. So this included making our own mini rosettes or swags, and her sleeve gusset or for the wiggle bones she used. So there was also quite a bit of personal research into these techniques and the best way to execute them. Ann Lowe is known for many techniques, 5 of which are using wiggle bones, rosettes, swags,
and sleeve
gussets, and
zippers?
oh yeah, hand-picked zippers.
A wiggle bone, for example, in a normal corset you have boning, which is for stability to keep it up. So she specifically used a wiggle bone. So I think it was made to give a little bit more flexibility within the tops of any corsets and stuff.
It kind of looked like
Just
exactly what you think a wiggle bone would look like. It's just a wiggle.
Ann Lowe said that the dress used 50 yards of fabric. I calculated 35 yards of fabric, but that includes all the fabric. The silk file, that includes the organza that went into the petticoat, and then on top of that, all the silk taffeta that's on the outside of the dress that we see. In order to create the swags and the rosettes, that's another 154 yards. So you take all that fabric and you create bias from it, and the 154 yards of bias is created from part of that 35. So different ways to sort of break that down. Cutting began in April when I started to make the petticoat. So we were running up against a lot of the supply chain issues. I waited for months and months for the original silk taffeta to arrive, and then all of a sudden they were like, we can't get it for you. And so I had to scramble and find like another supplier, and luckily they got that to me much more quickly, and I just started cutting, because cutting takes 10 days. All of that bias, just you're cutting and cutting and cutting and doing the same thing for a really long time over and over again. How she did it again in 10 days is a absolute mystery to me. I don't know how she did it. I know she had a staff of women who were supporting her, but even then it just seems like a Herculean. I don't know I have no idea how she did it. The dress is about 70% hand sewn. So some of the main seams of the dress are all sewn by machine. The petticoat, for the most part, is sewn by machine, but anywhere you see some sort of surface detail, every last bit is by hand, and that took a really long time. So 250 hours, I would say, just sewing. The swags and rosettes took about 20 hours, I would say, with the help of the students. And that was over 3 weeks. So from January actually seeing the dress to delivering it in July, that's how long it took. I wanted it to be as close to Ann Lowe's as possible, except for a few things. I feel like I did that. When we look at the Jacqueline Kennedy photographs of her in the dress, they're black and white. The dress looks white, right? So that's our sort of collective memory about what this dress looks like. However, when you go to the archives and you see the actual dress, it actually has a little bit of a pink hue to it, and I had to sort of reconcile, am I looking at the accuracy of the dress, or how am I reconciling that with how we sort of will expect to see it, and sort of balance our collective memory against the actual look of the dress. So in the end, I didn't have a choice because of those supply chain issues. So I had to go with white, and that's just how it ended up. One of the biggest challenges that I had was that I didn't know Jacqueline Kennedy's measurements, and there was really no way to know, because you can go online, you can find her measurements, but that's not going to tell you anything. You also don't know what undergarments she has on. All I had was the measurements of the dress, and so it was very difficult to know if something was right. So that was a third sort of layer of, what does it look like? How does the population expect to see this? And then on top of that, what was she actually wearing? What was the lived experience of putting that dress on? And sort of finding myself, just having to make an educated choice on like what's going to work and what's not going to work. 9 times out of 10, I sort of veered towards the scientific.
Well, for me, my biggest challenge on this was the hand sewing, because it became very tedious and it hurt a lot. And there's a lot of stabbing that happens, it's inevitable.
The hand sewing was also probably the most difficult part for me. I took photos of my hands throughout the process, and I gained like extra muscle in this area to the point where it was noticeable. And it was really weird because you just wouldn't expect to get like buff in your thumb area. I also developed like a lot of calluses, and my nails looked really messed up because I kept getting the needle underneath them. So it made me just think about how like everything her hands went through, because that was just like a summer of working on it. And she ran her family business since I believe 16, so she'd been doing this like basically her whole life. So it's just really interesting to think about what her hands must have looked like.
Hand sewing. There's something more new. I feel like at school it's always machine sewing, so doing by hand was just totally different. Just a lot of pain, but yeah.
This is what the measurement said on the dress. This is what I know about it, and I'm just going to go with that. Because, the fibers, they stretch. The fabric, it deteriorates, so maybe it's bigger than it originally was, but I just went with what was there. So I thought I was going to be like really, really smart and use a special foot attachment on the machine in order to create the ruching around the petticoat trim. And this system worked when I used it on muslin, but to Ann Lowe's credit, she knew what she was doing. When I actually used the silk file in order to create the petticoat trim, it wouldn't accept the foot, so I had to do all of that by hand just like she did it. It was a contraption in a lot of ways because of the intense, there's a corset that she has. There's like these little wiggle bones that run across the bust line, which are just so cute. There's like these little zigzag metal bones that she uses to line the cup of the bra, and she can shape the bust, and she used those in a lot of her corsets. So that was really fun to look for and to apply, because I'd never done that before. She used traditional and high quality supplies. So I was like, well, there's some beautiful Petersham silk ribbon. And luckily those places are still in business. And there are people who are doing so much recreation these days that they're, I guess, resurrecting some of these trims and supplies that we all want to use. The original dress has these beautiful orange blossom wax flowers. And they're nestled in each one of the rosettes, except the one in the back, presumably so she wouldn't sit on it. And there's about 12 little rosettes, 12 little orange blossoms in this little bundle, and they're adorable. And so I played with lots of different ways to make them, and sort of had to think about, do I want to do it just like her, or do I want to do something that might last a little longer and be a lot less fragile, and what supplies are out there that I have to do these with. So, in the end, I did test them with wax, but they didn't come out as well. And so I ended up going with Sculpey and picking different colors and, painting the little stamen. And we used a little lily, and we shaped a little bit so it looks more like an orange blossom. But Alex, he made all of those after I figured it all out, and he just he put them in the little bundles, and they're just delightful little detail of the dress that I just adore. The something blue. There's a rayon ribbon or a silk ribbon at the front of the petticoat. It was sort of like this, oh, there's the something blue when we opened it up, and that was fun to see. There was a pin still sitting in the petticoat as well. That was sort of spoke to my heart, because I was like, oh, this is made. This is something that's actually somebody went through and made this.
One secret I do know is Ann Lowe has this technique where she likes to put little bows like hidden within things. So I think it was on the petticoat, like there was like a blue bow on the inside, or was it a butterfly?
That's a blue bow.
It was a bow. Okay, yeah.
Isn't it for wedding dresses something blue on the dress?
Yeah, so she hid in like a little blue bow in the petticoat.
There, on the original dress, there were these wax flowers in the middle of the rosette. I believe the amount was 11 to 15. So for a recreation, we actually made them out of a type of clay. I believe it was sculpted diamond clay. So there were little molds we made of it. So inside each like big rosette flower, there are a bunch of tiny smaller ones.
You know, there's moments of things being sewn quickly, you know, not just, you know, there are bigger leaps being taken between stitches, you know, maybe the stitches are a little crooked. So I like to think that maybe that's because, you know, they were doing this quickly because of the accident, and they're just trying to get the job done. And I also like to think that, you know, that's Ann Lowe's skills at work. She knew what was important to do perfectly. She knew the time that she had, and she delivered it, which is sort of a hallmark of being a great designer, no matter if it's haute couture or it's mass market. You know, she was like, I have to get this dress done. This can be sacrificed. This has to be perfect. This is something that's not so important, and we'll get the dress done and deliver it on time.
I just think she wanted more recognition. Like, a lot of her clients wouldn't, like, if someone asked her, oh, who made the dress, they wouldn't say it was Ann Lowe, to say, oh, it was a color designer. Like, they were never gave recognition at all. I think that was just really, really important to her.
I definitely don't think she was doing it for fame or money or anything like that, especially because when the dresses were ruined, she didn't tell the Kennedys, and the Kennedys are very rich, so they definitely could have afforded to compensate for part of it, but I think she was really driven by her love of the craft.
So 10 days before Ann Lowe was supposed to deliver the dress to Newport, Rhode Island, a pipe burst in her atelier, and it ruined not just the original wedding dress, but the whole wedding party's dress. There were like 10 or 15 dresses that were there, and she had to remake them. You know, she had 10 days to do it, and so they started cutting. She reordered all the fabric again. She hired her staff to work days and nights and overtime in order to execute the dress. And you know, in the end, she remade all the dresses, and she took the train down to Newport, Rhode Island. Up to Newport, Rhode Island to to deliver the dresses. And the story goes is that when she got there, she was told that she wasn't allowed to use the front door, that she had to go through the servants' quarters. And she stood her ground, and she said, you know, I'm delivering this dress here at this time in this place. So it was in a lot of ways one injustice after the other in her as a designer, which really speaks to me, because while I'm working on the dress, while I'm doing these repetitive things, and this Herculean task of making this dress is just, you know, was always present, you know, thinking about like what she was going through, which is something we can all experience and should know about when thinking about, you know, the work of design and creating a garment.
Something that I remember about Ann Lowe is just like her dedication, because for her to recreate all the dresses and like keep it to herself, like I feel like if it was me, nobody would hear the end of it because of how like long it took. And I'll always remember like how courteous she was and like how specific she was to being a designer. It's very inspiring to see like her incorporate her own techniques and her not caring like how it's done, like how imperfect it was, but it made it perfect in its own sense.
Ann Lowe was just such a skilled designer. She attended college for design for a bit, but she was only there for, I think, half a year, as the teacher was like, we can't teach you anything more. You already know it. So I don't know. It's just really inspiring to hear about her skill and tenacity, since, again, she'd been working as a designer for her family since 16. So
yeah, I'm just proud of how much of a hard worker she was. Like, you know, she would do all these dresses for a lot of clients, but still wouldn't get that recognition, but she still worked and worked and worked and worked to kind of get where she was. And unfortunately, it never really panned out for her, but it's just the way just to have like that, tenacity just to keep going, like no matter like how many people try to like just fail you. It was just really lovely.
I think they learned the valuable lesson that sometimes design can be boring, that sometimes sewing can be repetitive, and that you're doing the same thing over and over again, that it can be a very lonely job, and it's a lot of hard work. I saw that as they were working on it. You know, they were still doing the same thing day after day, hour after hour, but they were committed. You know, they worked really hard in order to do it. But I could see at times, you know, like, oh, we're still doing this. And when I asked them about it today, you know, they're like, oh my God, you know, they do have some sort of exasperation about it because, you know, that's in them. You know, their hands were as beat up as mine were by the end of the process. And I don't know, maybe they felt good about that. Maybe they could see that in their own hands, and a little bit of point of pride for them.
I'm most proud of how the dress turned out. Like, it's just such a joyous experience to see like everything get put together after taking all this time. And it's just like emotional a little bit because you're like, we did this for Ann Lowe, and we really, like, we did this. We made her proud.
Yeah, I'm really proud of being able to kind of bring more attention to her, and so she can get the recognition she deserves, being able to almost not quite continue her legacy, but prolong it and really bring it into the light. I think it really brought the attention of Ann Lowe's existence to a lot of people. Everyone I told the project about was like, oh, Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress. And I was like, yeah, but the project really focuses on Ann Lowe. Mm-hmm. They were like, who's that? So kind of being able to talk about her and bring her into public recognition.
Yeah, it just feels good to be like kind of immersed in a designer's work, like seeing how, because sometimes you don't really know how they work, like you're like, like imposter syndrome, like am I doing this right, like how is this, but like, you know, doing work the same work she did makes you kind of feel more like grounded as a designer for me.
I think one of the things about the Ann Lowe story is that we're looking at invisible work, and you know, who's seen, who's not seen in the world of fashion and the world of making things, and in a wonderful way we're bringing a lot of light on Ann Lowe and other African American designers in America, which I think is, you know, so important. You know, along with that, you know, we're creating the mannequins that the dresses are going to be displayed on. That's a lot of invisible work, because you're really not supposed to look at the mannequins, right? You're supposed to look at what the mannequins are doing in order to display the dress or the garment. So, you know, that's a really important part of this whole process of making Ann Lowe's work come alive.
So before, I didn't really have much of an interest in like historical like garments. I wouldn't say that I didn't like it. I just really never thought about it like away from class. So when I first heard about it from Professor Roesle, I was like, this is quite interesting, like to recreate something like from the past at least and give like Ann Lowe this recognition. It like intrigued me, and I was like, I kind of want to see how this is going to be.
I've had an interest in historical garments, but not really anything as recent as Ann Lowe. I'm primarily interested in like Rococo and Victorian fashion. I think it's very interesting with all the layers. So it was cool to do something that's in between the future and that time period, obviously leaning more towards the future because that's how time works. But it was really interesting to work on it and see the techniques that were used at the time and how they differ from present day and Victorian and that type of thing.
Cool.
I wasn't interested in historical dress as much. Like I learned about it in school, but I think really to see these techniques that kind of dissolve now with, you know, machine stitching and stuff, it's really nice to see like how hands-on like things used to really be.
I feel like being a fashion student here at UD, there's a lot of like workshopping you into being in the industry kind of. A lot of the techniques we do is like very specific rather than like compared to like what we did with Ann Lowe. Like it didn't really matter how things looked on the opposite side of the garment or anything. But here we're definitely graded on like, is the seam straight? Is your pins like for draping? So it's nice to like have both of them, because like when you're working on your own, it doesn't really matter to you as long as you make whatever you want to make. But then like when you're in a different environment where you have professors in the field, you're just like a little intimidated, but it's also interesting to see like how they view your work as well.
Alex and Katya, thank you so much for being here. Why were you asked to recreate this dress? And can you, explain where the dress lives and a little bit about its protection?
Yeah. So I guess what I was told was that from the JFK archives, the head curator there said it's not in a state of being presented. And I know all of you will know a little bit more about that than I do, because I'm more of a designer. But when I looked at the dress, there's well, let me back up a little bit because it's very interesting when you think about construction. There are 10 panels that run all the way around the dress. So these, the front there's 6 and in the back there's 4, and they're all cut on bias. And there's no waistline seam, so that the those princess panels sort of extend all the way up to right under the bust, underneath those draped panels around the waistline. And unfortunately, because of the weight of the dress, which actually isn't that heavy, but it's just when you consider that all of those panels were cut on bias, it started to tear and it just can't be held up anymore. And the JFK archives felt that it just wasn't in the right state to be presented anymore. So they asked me, and they said, can you recreate it? There was a question in the chat, is there any information about the inspiration for the dress design? And I was going to answer it, but I'll mention it now, that what I read and what I was told was that there were a lot of cooks in the kitchen, like I mentioned. It's been said that Joe Kennedy wanted an American designer. So Ann Lowe was part of that circuit. She was a natural pick for the wedding gown. And Ann Lowe wanted to do something that was very frilly. It has her antebellum kind of Southern belle style to it. Jacqueline Kennedy had made a request to have a tremendous Ann Lowe dress. So a lot of people remember Jacqueline Kennedy for this dress, but they also, it doesn't sort of connect to what we also know her as in the White House just a few years later, which was very French, very minimal, Givenchy and Chanel. And so the inspiration, I think, was very much drawn from Ann Lowe's experiences. Ann Lowe wanted to pull out all the stops and do as many different techniques as possible. And I think that became a tour de force design for her.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for, we conducted this interview several months back, and I totally forgot that the panels of the dress run all the way up to the bust. So, you have just a couple inches, which then, flows out into maybe 40 or 36 or so. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Alex, let me ask you, prior to this project, you mentioned Rococo and Victorian. Before versus now, how has this project made you think of historical costume, couture, evening? Has it changed your design ideas, inspiration, thoughts about the future?
It's definitely redirected the path that I'm taking currently. Originally,
when I was going into college just 2 years ago, I was more so planning on going in the costume design direction. But I really had a lot of fun digging into the history of the garment and recreating it. And this summer, I'm actually doing research again and doing digital recreation of 1920s gowns. So um, it's made me appreciate historic garments more, especially considering how the sewing machines didn't do all that they do now. And having had to sew down those swags and rosettes entirely by hand just really helps put yourself in the designers of the past's shoes and grounds you a bit, like realizing how amazing it is that the sewing machines that we have today do everything they do. Like my sewing machine can like monogram letters, which is super cool. um,
Someone said, like, there's no new design, right? Everything is taken. I won't say copied. Everything is taken from the past. And I think, to know fashion is to know history, and to to have that strong foundation is really necessary if you want to innovate, and if you want to create from a unique point of view in your own work.
Yeah.
Alex, you did have a lot of history when we were talking. I think you're the one who told me about like how much she charged and how much it cost. Is that right?
She, because of the pipe bursting, she had a loss of what today would be $21,000 that she never told the Kennedys about, never mentioned any of it. So this gown that should have been like her big moment that really gets her name out there on the map and sets her up for a long time ended up doing a lot of damage to her business.
So
Because
after paying her workers and for materials, she lost money on this whole thing, having to
Yeah.
create the whole bridal suite garments again, and probably pay her workers, well, obviously for their hours.
She
Uh,
paid them time and a half to stay, and have all of the, it wasn't just 9 to 5 when she was trying to recreate the whole trousseau.
yeah, midnight oil.
Yeah, and so she had like I think it was a $700 loss is what she said in in $1953 or $1952. So
I mean, that was probably a car. I don't really know, but probably.
yeah,
Uh, but when we look at like couture gowns today and what some oligarchs spend on wedding dresses, this is pretty tame, I guess.
it was modest almost. It's very
I guess
sweet.
post-war-y or close to. We want to seem normal, regular. And at the time, when the garment, when the wedding happened, and the dress obviously was written about and photographed so prevalently, was Anne's name attached to it at the time?
It was, but it was more of a casual thing, is the sense that I'm getting. It was just a dress that she got made. She wasn't quite she was, this is conjecture, so I don't want to.
Certainly.
My sense is that she was the little Negro dressmaker, right? And that she was, this was the how she was hired, and she wasn't put in the same category, even though she did the same type of work and put in the same amount of effort to create these dresses. There was a question, what was Miss Bouvier's reaction to the dress, and what was the reaction of her mother and any others involved? It was said that when the doors opened and Jacqueline was at the back of the church, that back of the aisle, whatever, I'm not sure if it was a church that they got married in, but that everyone gasped, and Ann Lowe was behind her and holding the veil, and was there to dress her and everything, and it was a sensation. Everybody loved the dress. Later it was said that Jacqueline Kennedy hated the dress, that she felt it made her look flat chested, that she felt like a lampshade in it. This is word of mouth, or from what I've read in different books. And there are a lot of books written about Jacqueline Kennedy and her wedding. I was just looking at another comment here. Last year, I read a book, Janet and Jackie, about the Bouvier women, and learned that Anne was a favorite dressmaker. Yes. Yes, and she thought it was too frilly. There is evidence from a later dressmaker of Jacqueline Kennedy's. I'm drawing a blank on the name right now. Who had opinions about. There was a quote from Margaret Powell's research on Ann Lowe about how the dress was nothing like what Jackie wanted, and so that's the little story about that.
Alex, I know like you did a lot of biographical work on Lowe. You said in the video that she took over the family business at 16. Can you talk more about maybe her later years as a designer, maybe in the 60s and forward?
She was a seamstress for high society all throughout the 1920s and 60s. And she owned a couple dress salons. The first was in Tampa, Florida from 1920 to 1927. And then I believe what happened is she went bankrupt, and then she owned another salon in New York City from 1950 to 1962. And then she went bankrupt again, and her final one was in Madison Avenue from 1968 to 1972. She won Couturier of the Year in 1961 and did go bankrupt, like I said, the year after in 1962.
It was reported that Jacqueline Kennedy did pay some debts of hers when she was in the hospital, but she was always robbing Peter to pay Paul because, as I mentioned in the chat, she was always underbidding herself. Maybe that was something, maybe that was a personal thing that she was doing, but maybe it was also because, she was scared of charging for what she really deserved, given her clientele. I think that's a really important story here, and something that I try to share with my students as well. To be an independent designer and try to make a living at it is not an easy thing.
No, absolutely. And I imagine, in her ateliers and studios, she was paying staff to work and to help her with this. And often, the last person you pay is yourself
Right.
or whoever's not in the room. So if that's a bill that goes unpaid, she's employing people who are working this trade craft that today is completely, well, is mostly lost in America in that case. And I'm sure she found it more important to keep food on their tables and to keep them sustaining than to I don't know, pay the water bill or what have you. Right? It's a sign of true talent for someone who can fail, get back up, be successful, fail again, get back up, be successful, and to keep going, and that determination. And yeah, sometimes sometimes we do underbid ourselves because we want the job. I think this probably was a pin in her hat. I know she made gowns and ensembles for many society women, but doing the Kennedy party or Kennedy bridal party was probably a pretty nice pin in that hat.
Yeah, it was an interesting time too because there's a little bit of an argument that, oh well, it wasn't important to mention her because, it was how many years before Kennedy was he was still just a senator at that point, right?
Yeah.
So there's a little bit like, well, it wasn't that important to mention it, but there were still like thousands of people in Newport, Rhode Island, like clamoring to get pictures. So to Mary Carr's question, what was the response of the fashion media to this dress design? People were, they were frothing, they were like rabid about seeing what Jacqueline Kennedy was wearing, but maybe Jackie didn't know what the impact could be, to share that name. I don't know.
Trying to find this image of her seated that was free in public use. I came across obviously a lot of images on the internet, and there's a Barbie with the very similar dress. There's illustrations of it on someone who looks sort of like Jackie, but I think it's supposed to be a bit more generic and not using her like. And I think it probably inspired a lot of brides.
Yeah, I mean, it's always in like top 10 bridal dresses of the past century. Oh, true. Yes. And probably that's he came from a very famous family. That's a very good point. Top 10 dresses. It's in so many different bridal books. I kind of, when I was trying to find out about Ann Lowe's process and, any sort of clues about what she went through and, what was this dress, how did she talk about it? There was no end to the amount of books about the Jacqueline, experience and the Kennedy White House. In fact, there was this one book that I found that it said one of the better books about Jacqueline Kennedy in the past 5 years. And I thought that was really, really funny. It's like, clearly.
For your book's jacket, yeah. This has been really fascinating. I hope this is a great foundation for everyone to be introduced to Ann Lowe if they didn't know her already. And again, this dress is just one of many, one dress in an illustrious career. And in our next two parts of this series, we will discuss Ann Lowe more. We will discuss the making of the exhibition, the selection of the garments, the building out of the exposition space. And then we will be live from the exhibition in September, and we'll have the curators walk us through in a personal and private visit. If you are in the Mid-Atlantic, I do encourage you to come down to Delaware. It's probably no more than a 10-minute taxi or Uber from the Wilmington Amtrak station, and check out Winterthur. It's an amazing museum, garden and library that was once a private home of one of the DuPonts, who was a voracious collector, and that's how the museum gets its roots. So it's pretty phenomenal piece of history. And here's a QR code if you'd like to learn more about Wintherthur Museum and Ann Lowe, American Couturier. It premieres September 9th and runs through January 7th, 2024 at Wintherthur Museum in Winterthur, Delaware. Thank you everyone for your time tonight. And please, if you liked this content, if you are a supporter of CSA, please consider making a donation. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.